I'll start recording this guy. Are we all good? Awesome. So just before, I just want to make sure I don't butcher your name because I've got a bad or tough last name. So Cuthbert.
Yeah, that's spot on.
Okay, perfect. So first of all, Stephen, thank you very much for taking the time today to come on the Fitness Burrito Podcast. So for anybody out there listening who hasn't listened to this podcast before, my name is Dan Curion. Just call me Dan Q. Like I said, my last name's tough. It's a French one, so a lot of people can't pronounce it well. But yeah, so this is episode, I think it's going to be episode 13. It's funny, I don't know if you have this problem because Steven has his own podcast too called The Strength Chat. I don't know. Do you get this problem like when you're trying to think about which number it is?
Yeah, and I must admit it is one of those. I've actually started just making a note of what episode it is.
Yeah.
Because I remember once I said the name of the episode, and then when I actually came to posting, it was completely the wrong number.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things that it's like, yeah, an itch you've got a scratch. I felt like I had to change it. So yeah, I know how you feel.
Okay, cool. So yeah, pretty excited about this one because Steven's fairly local to me. So are you live in Leeds, Steven?
Yeah, so just live on the outskirts of Leeds. So if you're going up out of Headingley, just live up near West Park.
Awesome. So yeah, both two Leeds guys. I'm from Canada originally, for anybody out there who hasn't listened to this. But yeah, so I'm pretty excited about this podcast because Steven he's a head coach at a local gym. He's had some really good guests on his own podcast. So we're going to talk a lot about kind of strength, muscle building, some takeaways, I guess that he's learned from just kind of some of the best experts in the industry. So just quickly, Steven, if you want to give a bit of an intro, background on yourself, can be as long or short as you want, mate. Go for it.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me on, Dan. It's going to be a little bit strange probably being on the opposite end of the questions for this. But yeah, Steve Cuthbert, originally from up on the Yorkshire coast, came to Leeds to university to study sport and exercise science at Leeds Met or Leeds Beckett now. I think it's called. Originally with the idea of being a PE teacher, so was really involved in rugby, and for PE teachers are cool. Don't really do a lot. I don't think. Sorry for any PE teachers listening. I thought that would be a cool job. Helped out in a local school. Realised that wasn't really for me, and then I got the opportunity to go over to Australia. So I went over and actually studied over there, sport and exercise science, and played a little bit of rugby over there, and just realised that being a PE teacher wasn't necessarily for me. So I got involved in, which was probably the next progression with sport and exercise science, which was strength and conditioning, with an AFL team or Aussie Rules. If you haven't seen Aussie Rules, YouTube it. It's a mixture of rugby and just randomness on a cricket pitch.
Yeah.
Cool. And then came back from Australia. Actually got a job at Primal just as a boot camp instructor because I was skint, and then I was also working as a tree surgeon, which was pretty cool. And did a couple of internships with rugby teams. So I was over at Bradford Bulls for maybe a season and a half, working with their Scholars Academy, and then eventually with the first team. Dropped that just because at the time I didn't have a car, but really enjoyed it. But I was still sort of working my way up at Primal, if you like, developing clients and classes. I did another internship at Yorkshire Carnegie. I only did a pre-season there, so it was quite short-lived. And I just found that actually it wasn't for me because the amount of time that you actually get to spend with these athletes is relatively short, depending on what the coach says. So yeah, I was only over there for a couple of weeks, but realised that I really enjoyed the strength side of things. And as I was getting busier, I stopped playing as much rugby. And a guy that I worked with, Chris Kershaw, actually gave me a powerlifting program. Just said, there you go, there's a 12-week program to compete in my first competition. And that was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And then from there, just got hooked with the strength training side of things, powerlifting side of things, and sort of put more emphasis on that. I still have an interest in the sport and the strength and conditioning side of things. I work with another guy who has developed sort of the athlete program at Primal, Matt Cook, but his is more speed. but I'm more interested in the strength side of things, and more that strength is relative to everybody. So I've had a 60-odd-year-old woman flip an 80-kilo tire, which is pretty cool. But then, I've also taken people to powerlifting and strongman competitions. So I hope no one's nodded off from that, but that's kind of my background, if you like.
Yeah, that's class, man. It sounds like you've had a pretty cool journey, I guess, from where you started and then now ended up in kind of the strength realm of things. You mentioned one thing that I kind of picked up on, and I thought I'd just get your opinion. I know it's kind of a side tangent, but you mentioned that you were working with teams and sometimes you don't get to spend that much time with them because of the coach. Now, this is one thing that I personally believe it needs to start changing a bit. I think you see it a little bit more in the States, but do you feel like as an S&C coach, and even just as a coach in general, when you're working with teams and multiple athletes, that we should have a bigger say when you're working with them and programming them and kind of like, their recovery, their training and all the rest?
That's an interesting question, and I've spoken to, I know a couple of coaches that work within professional sport or consult with teams. I think in season, I think that is very much down to the head coaches, because obviously there's only, from a strength and conditioning point of view, there's only so much that you can do in terms of training. Like, you're not going to test the 1 rep maxes or make them beat their running, their sprint speed or anything like that. However, I do think as S&C coaches, we can have an influence on managing their fatigue levels. So I actually saw that the S&C coach who was with South Africa when they won the World Cup last year, he's now gone to a Premiership rugby team. And I read a few interviews on there, and the success that South Africa had, because they were quite fit, is that they'd be training on the pitch, and then it would be like the S&C coach would go to the head coach and say, look, we need to take them off, have a little bit of recovery, a little bit of rest. And then when they went out on the pitch, they were doing things a lot more skillfully. Now, you can argue that the old school mentality of when you're under fatigue, you need to concentrate a little bit more. But I think with science right now, or sports science right now, you can push that threshold a little bit and know when to pull it back. In terms of off season and pre-season, I think that the getting people stronger and faster, that the S&Cs can have a little bit more of a influence on, and as well, I know there's that argument of during an off season, they don't want their athletes going off and doing crazy things, but there's people out there that are speed coaches or whatever element you need to work on to go and learn from these coaches. So when you actually come back to your team environment, you've worked on the weaknesses that you might have, and from there, I mentioned the guy that I work with, Matt Cook. He worked with a couple of athletes, and then ended up going and looking at other teams to do it on a bigger scale. So I think S&C coaches can have an influence, but I think it depends on the time of season.
Cool. No, I think that's a good answer. And the reason I was asking is I've noticed, especially on the few podcasts I've listened to in the past kind of 4 or 5 months, a lot of S&C coaches, especially in the States at the collegiate level, like Division I, like the whole microdosing training perspective is kind of starting to come in. So where they're doing maybe like shorter duration type sessions, but they're doing it more frequently throughout the week. And there's maybe not a crazy amount of effort, where then sometimes there is, and it's just like things are starting to change a bit. And I think the more the coaches tend to give rein to the S&C coach, I think the more that starts getting manipulated. And it's like you said, it just depends on the coach and the time of year, right?
Yeah, I think it is. Things are massively changing, because you look at some rugby players, footballers. You could probably put them in any situation, and they are athletes. They are, the amount of things that they can do. But I think especially at the top level, they've got to be good for their sport. Which is that argument of are you training them to be a sportsman, a rugby player, or are you training them to be an athlete, which is quite interesting. But I think in terms of the training and the content and the reasoning behind things, it's becoming a lot better.
Yeah, and it will continue to. Like the research that's just coming out every day is just ridiculous. You know what I mean? So I can't even wait to see what kids are going to be like in the next 15, 20 years. Like, because you see kids that are like 16, 17 years old all around the world who are just jumping out of the gym and they're running faster than ever before. And it's just like, they're technically unbelievable. So yeah, can't even imagine, man. It's going to be crazy. Awesome. Okay. Well, I know you just mentioned strength, but before we dive into it, did you see the deadlift world record live the other day?
I did. Watched it as it was happening.
What do you think?
I'll be honest. I had my doubts. A lot of people asked me about this, and I did have my doubts, just because I think Thor Bjornsson is an absolute crazy athlete. But I think sometimes when the pressure's on, he can maybe crumble a little bit or fall at the final hurdle. But in the comfort of his own gym, in his own environment, obviously, and with everyone around him, bigging him up, I think maybe he was always going to do it. I think there was plenty more there. Some people said, was he going to do more on the day? But obviously doing 501 is going to absolutely ruin him. But I'm very interested to see, just within strongman, where they can take that. But then on the flip side of it, at the end, I don't know if anyone watched it live when he just called out Eddie Hall to fight. That kind of just made it a completely different element. I thought he was going to challenge him to a deadlift off, which would have been pretty cool. But they have now made it into like a cartoon thing of, when you say who would win in a fight between a gorilla and a bear, like this is, or King Kong and Godzilla. It's one of those things that you never thought would happen, but it is, which I think, on maybe a little bit of a tangent, is making them step away from strongman or drawing the attention away from strongman rather than attracting attention to strongman. But in terms of the deadlift, I think he's got more there. And it'll be interesting to see sort of what the aftermath of this is, and where it is going to be taken from a strength point of view. Did you watch it?
Yeah, I did. So just to give some context to anybody out there who has no idea what we just talked about. So Eddie Halls is this massive strongman who deadlifted, was it 500? 500 kilos. What was it, last year, 2 years ago?
Maybe 3 years.
Yeah, a couple of years ago. Yeah, he did it in Leeds, actually, didn't he? And then so Thor, who's this Icelandic beast who's been in movies, you've probably seen him and all that stuff. He just beat the record. He did 501, and he made it look pretty easy. And then at the end, for some reason, he decides to call out Eddie Hall, who had previously held the record, and said, "Yeah, let's fight." And apparently, they're going to fight, which is just ridiculous because they're massive. I don't even know how they're going to swing. Really.
It's going to be next year, so at least I've got a year to sort of train. But in my head, I just think it'll be, do you know that game where there's two boxers and you just press the handles and they're just standing in the middle of the ring punching each other? I think it might just be that. But if they land an absolute haymaker, the amount of strength and power that they'll probably be able to produce, it'll be absolutely crazy. It'll either be something that will be absolutely awesome, like Rocky versus Ivan Drago, or it'll be just watching two unconditioned fellas running around a ring, and then one tiring and knocking the other one out. So either way, I'm 100% going to be watching it.
100%.
Just to see how it goes.
Yeah, defo, man. I can't wait. That's going to be fun. All right, man. Well, a few side tangents away. Now we can dive into it. So I know we just spoke about a lot of kind of S&C based and kind of training and other topics. And usually what I want to do on the podcast is I try to kind of break things down a little bit and try to make it just a bit more understandable maybe for the average person out there who is still maybe has performance-based goals, but a lot of people don't know training and nutrition and the principles of it. So I think sometimes it's cool to just Yeah, talk about it and make it a little bit easier for them to understand. And I think with you being on, obviously having your strength knowledge, I thought it'd be cool to talk about just people training at home right now. Because at the moment, when I'm doing polls on Instagram or I'm asking people on Facebook, a lot of people are struggling and saying, "Oh, like there's no point in me training at home because I can't get stronger, I can't get bigger." So I guess in terms of strength, how would you, I guess, guide someone at the moment from home, or how are you doing so with your clients just in terms of getting stronger? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think everyone, for any coaches listening, have probably had the same questions from clients, and especially, so I think I mentioned, before we started recording that a couple of weeks ago, me and myself and a couple of my clients were going to compete in powerlifting. Luckily, a couple of my clients had access to home gyms, which was really beneficial. So we still followed the plan. We didn't test all on one day, just because I didn't want them injuring themselves or anything like that. So because I wasn't there to spot them, or help them out. So we spread that out over a week, and then we can have a little bit of a deload and chill out, and which, depending on how long lockdown lasts for, we can then build up and go into other things. However, a lot of people weren't as lucky with that. So they went from, and myself included, went from lifting relatively heavy, starting peaking for a competition, to then having nowhere near as much weight as home, or maybe no equipment at all. So what being a little bit of a realist, there is going to be a little bit of a decrease in strength for anyone that is either powerlifting, just training for generic strength, or anything like that. There's probably quite a lot of science behind it that you are going to decrease strength. How I've just been putting it across is that when all this is over and when the gyms reopen and you go back into the gym and do a squat, bench, or deadlift, or a trap bar deadlift, or whatever it is, you're going to be rusty at that, because you've not done it for, we're in week 7 of lockdown. You won't have done it for a while. And it's a little bit like, if you get into a car and you've not driven, or if you've not ridden a bike for a while, you're not going to be as efficient in that movement. So things will feel a little bit heavy. And as well, you've not had that load on your back. So, your core's going to be thinking, whoa, hang on a minute. What's happening here? We've been doing goblet squats or using a rucksack or something like that. But it's not that if you lose that strength, you're never going to get it back. It might be after a week of training, you might think, oh, actually, all the cobwebs are blown off and I'm absolutely fine with this. It might be a couple more weeks. But once you sort of accept that, then it's like, right, what do I do next? What can I go from there? For people, and I can imagine, or I'm going to probably speak to people that don't have as much equipment at home. You can still train for strength. You've just got to maybe change your approach a little bit. So unless you've got a massive amount of weight at home, or a barbell or a squat rack, you're not going to be able to load up squat and deadlift. Let's talk about those as the biggest exercises. So one of my favorite quotes is, keep plan B as close to plan A as you can. So we can't do a squat. Okay, you can do a goblet squat. So we can work on volume and we can change the tempo, add pauses in and all that sort of stuff. However, how do we make that more challenging? So the closest thing that you can probably do if you don't have as much equipment at home is a single leg exercise. You're still going to get stronger, but you're going to get stronger in that exercise. And even if you think, well, powerlifting or strongman or whatever it is, I'm on 2 legs. What's the point of doing it on 1 leg? I can tell you now, I've been doing single leg stuff, and it's amazing how much I am so rubbish at it. But if that is going to highlight things that, okay, so my knee might be caving in, so that means my glutes might not be working. And the stronger you get your single leg, it sounds a little bit daft when you think about it, but if both single leg exercises are getting stronger, that's only going to benefit when you get on 2 legs. Because if you've been absolutely hammering single leg exercises, which are quite tough and quite challenging, when it comes to having a barbell on your back, you're going to think, oh, wow, I'm a lot more stable. Yeah, I've got the bar on my back. and you can progress that a little bit more. And that doesn't have to say that you have to dive in straight with a rear foot elevated 4-second eccentric with a 2-second pause split squat. It could just be, right, I'm really bad at split squats. I'm going to start off on a body weight, then I'm going to add load, then I'm going to change the tempo, then I'm going to maybe go to a rear foot elevated split squat and go from there. Another thing that a lot of people have been working on is you see quite a lot of people do like pistol squats, which is quite cool. So I'm not a calisthenics specialist, but there's variations that you can play around with to add a little bit of novelty into your training, or it might be working on pull-ups, getting more pull-ups out. So you just have to change the goalposts a little bit and think, right, what can I actually get stronger in? And then on the flip side of that, as well as getting stronger, for me, every time I go into a powerlifting competition, and when you think about it now, you think, well, why haven't I sorted it out before? My right shoulder starts getting a little bit niggly, and my right pec starts getting really, really tight. And usually I just go to the physio, have a massage, and then I'm good to go. Rather than actually, there's probably an underlying issue there that whether it's because I'm too stubborn or the excuse of I don't have time. Right now, all I have is time. Because yes, I'm still speaking to clients and still doing online sessions and all that sort of stuff. But I'm not going from session into session into session and then having to come home and have food and that sort of stuff. I can still roll, stretch, look after my shoulder, whilst I'm doing programs or whatever else it might be. And actually my shoulder's a lot better. So I've been working on push-ups, rather than, because I can't bench press. And there is, a little bit of research out there to say that you can still get some benefit from doing push-ups in terms of increasing a similar sort of strength compared to bench press. So there is a few things that you can that you can focus on, but yeah, I think what else you can measure strength by.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, mate. And I think you mentioned a few things earlier that kind of carry over into your answer now. I guess what people need to realize is, especially if you're a strength athlete, to your point, you're a power lifter. If you don't have the kit, if you don't have the weight, you don't have the load to just progressively overload over time, chances are, yeah, you're probably going to lose a bit. But just remember, the other thing too is you lose that practice of lifting that specific lift. And again, it kind of goes back to your point earlier about rugby players on the pitch. They're going to try to do sport specific drills because they need to get good at those movements, right? And it's the same thing as a power lifter. If you go from, deadlifting 4 or 5 times a week to not deadlifting, well, when you get back to the gym, you're not going to just dive straight into it. You're going to slowly progress your way back into it until you feel great. But in the meantime, why not focus on maybe kickback RDLs or pistol squats or single arm or single leg? Because again, worst case scenario, you actually maintain some of your strength because you're actually fixing imbalances, right? And then when you go back to your main lifts, yeah, you might have lost a little bit. And I was going to ask you after in terms of if you use percentages or RPE or both. But once you go back into your main compound lifts, well, chances are your weaknesses have been corrected a little bit. You might have lost a little bit of strength, but overall you might come back with a better base, right?
Yeah. Think of this as, using an analogy from sport is GPP, so general physical preparedness, and thinking about powerlifting. Really, after a while since you've done it, there's only so many variations you can do of squat, bench, and deadlift. Like, they're not the most exciting movements in the world unless you have targets and weights to hit and you're involved in competing. I think using the situation that we're in now is quite stressful. So creating more stress, thinking about, oh, well, I need to squat, I need to bench and deadlift. Do something that's fun. I know for me, I've probably added in a lot more conditioning than I've ever done when I've been doing powerlifting. Now, we all know that as coaches, and what we say to our clients is that you need that aerobic base to help with recovery. So how many times, I know I've had it, when at the start of a powerlifting program, the volume's quite high and it takes me a long time to recover in between. Whereas actually, going for longer walks, going for a run, adding in some conditioning sessions, like what you mentioned there, Dan, it's building that base a little bit more, and play around with something, play around with the pistol squats that we mentioned, because it is fun. I gave a couple of my clients Turkish get up, really good exercise. It ticks a lot of boxes. Right, do a Turkish get up with the weirdest, strangest thing that you can. One guy did it with his dog, like he's got a puppy, and it's
impressive.
Sort of,
That's impressive.
Yeah, I was quite impressed that the dog stayed still. But he did it, and it ticked a lot of boxes in terms of exercise. But it was just something a little bit different. And like what we touched on, you can focus on those weaknesses. And when you think about when people fail lifts, it's usually that they either lose tension or lose bracing, or their knees cave in or something like that. You can work on those. Or if people are struggling to hit depth, like I've not worn my lifting shoes any time during lockdown, but it's given me a lot of time to work on ankle mobility, because you see some guys and women who just wear flat shoes and are squatting crazy amounts, and I'm like, I can't do that. I need that heel raise. Right, this is a perfect time to work on that. So yeah, think of it as a challenge and an opportunity, because I know, and I was like this the first couple of weeks, like, what am I going to do with my training? But as soon as you accept it and think, right, what's the plan from now? What do I want to actually achieve? And you've got to think about, right, when I walk into the gym, what position do I want to be on? Do I want to be heavier than when lockdown started, and a little bit unfit, and have to start from square one again? Or do I maybe want to start one step after level one, but I've still done a little bit, I've still got that base, and then you can work a little bit more. So I think that's really important to think about.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny, that last point you made, there's a few things I was going to ask you off the back of that. Like, that's one thing I've really focused on throughout lockdown, is I thought, you know what, I'm going to come out of lockdown lighter. I'm going to focus on my tracking, focus on my nutrition. I'm going to try to lose a good 10, 15 pounds. So I could probably lose it. Like, I'm not overweight, but I just want to get a little bit leaner, because then obviously it just means that my relative strength's better. And then I just think that's one thing a lot of people at the moment could probably take advantage of, and then focus on the imbalances. One thing you talked about in your answer there, and this is just me kind of curious in terms of how you coach it, when you said bracing, because this is the big one. Because especially when you work with new clients that maybe haven't been in the gym that long, and they don't really know what engaging their core is or bracing. How do you coach bracing? I guess, can you just give a bit of a detailed answer, not too detailed, but just kind of like what bracing is?
Yeah. First off, I know a lot of people might just be thinking, oh, well, I just need to get a belt. That's not really the first starting point. Your body has a natural weightlifting belt, if you like, and there's a load of muscles in your core, not just sort of your abs. They're in the back of your body as well. And the belt, when you add the belt in, it's a little bit like supplements to your diet. If you can't get it in, it helps it there. Like a protein shake, increasing your protein. When you add the belt in, yes, you're going to lift a little bit more weight, but it's only a supplement. So the first thing that I will say is, every client that I work with has a phase where they do some beltless work, and that's same with knee sleeves, just to build up that core strength or stability. I know there's sometimes a little bit of crossover, what people want to call it. And the main thing that we're looking for when we're doing deadlifting, and, well, to be fair, any strength training that you're doing, we want to create as much stiffness as you can. So there's that analogy of, we want our spine to be an iron rod, not a fishing rod. Yeah, because a fishing rod can snap and can bend. So one of the cues that I'll say is, a lot of people will just tuck the tummy in, And you will be able to feel your tummy squeeze, but we don't want to feel a squeeze. We want to feel a stretch of your tummy. So what I'll usually say is, and you can give it a go now if you want. You're going to take a big breath in, and then you're going to do a short breath out through your mouth, and then just hold that breath, and your tummy will just stretch across. And you're going to hold that whilst you're doing your squat or whilst you're doing your deadlift. What I have found is that, and I'm still kind of working on a better cue, if you like, for deadlift, because people either create tension at the top of the deadlift or at the bottom of the deadlift. And myself included, I set myself at the bottom, so create tension at the bottom in my setup. And that's quite hard to do. But for squat, that's a really easy way of doing it. It doesn't work for everyone, but it gives you an idea that even if you just do that small breath out, you'll feel your tummy stretch a little bit. And then that's the exact same when you're going to do when you're wearing a belt. So you're going to try and do that, but as your tummy stretches, it'll expand, and that's how you're pushing it against the belt. But for anyone that's potentially struggling with that, or think that they might fail a lift because their core stability, core strength is a little bit not as good, or their weak point, I'd have a look at sort of the McGill Big Three. There's a load of other variations that you can do, but dead bugs are really, really good. Again, focusing on the bracing side of things, a side plank, a dynamic horse stance, just holding a plank, even adding in some carries, so front-loaded carries like Zercher squats. And they don't have to be crazy, crazy heavy. All you're doing is, it's not like an ab workout where you want to be thinking, oh my God, my abs are in bits. You just want to be thinking, okay, I can feel my abs working. And then you can go into the lift. So that's sort of, as you'll probably realise as this podcast goes on, I'm not the most complicated person in the world. So I'll try and keep it as simple as you can. But that's the drill or the cue that I would use in terms of bracing.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. And I think that's the thing. A lot of the things we're talking about aren't overly complicated. And that, I think that's one of those, it's one of the things that we do in the fitness industry. We just try to overcomplicate and find the best new way of doing everything all the time. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
When the basic principles just work over and over and over again if you just apply it. And it could be as simple as just adding load to your workouts or adding a rep to your workouts. Like, it doesn't need to be anything crazier than that. But eventually, once you get to levels which is more like yourself, where you're starting to lift really heavy, and maybe you have clients that are around that kind of level too, then that's where you start manipulating the variables in your training and your structure. But for, I would say 95% of people out there, they could probably squeeze a lot more out of their workouts by doing less and making it more simple.
Yeah, absolutely. There was, I've been recording quite a lot of sport documentaries, seeing as though there's no live sport on at the minute. Although I did watch the UFC the other day, which was quite nice.
Yeah, that was crazy. There were some good fights in there.
Some very good fights. And I recorded, it was an interview with Martin Johnson. So obviously the 2003 Rugby World Cup winning captain. And the question that he got asked was, what does it take to win a World Cup final? And it was probably one of the best answers I've heard in a situation like that. And he just said, to win a World Cup final is the same as winning any test match. You still need to do the basics. So you still need to catch the ball. You still need to pass the ball. You still need to make your tackles. You still need to win your line outs. And all of that is the basics. And, you know, when it comes to putting that in a training and nutrition sense, right, train 3 or 4 times a week. That might be a minimum. Make sure that you're having, you know, protein and veggies with every meal. Make sure you're getting a good night's sleep. Make sure that you're managing your stress. You know, and it's one of those things where I think everyone is looking for that quick fix or that magic formula. And I mean, don't get me wrong, when I first started out, you know, I wanted to tell everybody the reason why, what the journal said, why to do this and everything. Whereas actually, you know, the maybe boring answer is, you know, you've just got to keep it simple, get those basics sorted, and then from there you can build those layers. You know, I've had a couple of people for the powerlifting side of things. first couple of programs or first couple of blocks of training are pretty basic, because I want to make sure that their technique and their efficiency of their lifts is absolutely spot on. So there's hardly any variations. It's just squatting, benching, deadlifting, and then a little bit of fluff, if you like. I like to throw in a couple of bicep curls in there, just because it's probably the most important exercise. But then you can have a look at variations. So for example, in a block that I've just sent a client for the next couple of weeks, they've got deficit paused deadlifts, which is a not very nice variation. Some people have got 1.5 squats, so all the way down, halfway up, back down, and then all the way back up. And that's just, any variation is to make people stay in a part of the lift where they're most uncomfortable, or where their weak point is. So for the 1.5 squat, I want to make sure that he gets into the hole, controls it into the hole, also hits depth, but is also strong out of it. So I'm making him, with the 1.5s, I'm making him spend a lot of time in that area, but also it's massively hitting his quads and his glutes, which I want to make stronger. So yeah, start off simple, and then you can be a little bit more specific.
Yep, defo. Awesome. I like that. Just a quick last one on the strength bit, because I'm just interested to kind of hear your thoughts. If I'm going back into the gym, how would you go about kind of structuring your lifts back into my program, or into someone's program? And then lastly on that is, how much volume, or in terms of percentages and stuff, how much do you try to hit in a week? Like, for someone trying to get stronger. So like, for some people it might be 8 sets at 75%, right, of a lift throughout the week. So it could be 3-3-3, 3-3-2, whatever, right? So I guess just those two things, how would you go about those?
So I think when the gyms reopen, I think everyone's going to want to really get after it, because I think we actually, I don't know if we said it at the start of the podcast or before we started recording, I think people are going to really want to focus on their health and fitness goals after all of this, after 8 weeks of being cooped up and maybe not feeling as though they're making as much progress as they would like with their goals. When you're going back into the gym, just take it slow and steady, because if you've had a 20 kilo kettlebell and you've just been doing goblet squats, and then you dive in and think, oh, I'm going to lift some real heavy weight, I'm going to do some back squats, you're going to be in absolute bits after it, because it's a new stimulus that your body hasn't had for a couple of weeks. So I'd recommend taking it slow and steady, and think of it like, is it an off season? Yeah, think of it as a little bit of an off season from either powerlifting or anything like that. And start off the volume. So, for example, I might go just start off with 2 sets of 10 in your first workout, and then your second squat session might be 2 sets of 6 to 8. So you've got a lighter session, and then you've got a heavier one. But the reps aren't there. It's not like doing 3 sets of 3 on back squat, which is going to be relatively heavy. And then you can start adding in the sets from there. For most of the powerlifting programs and most of the strength stuff that I'll work with clients, I'll send their program weekly and ask them how are they feeling, because sometimes life gets in the way, or you might have been traveling, or you might be running late. So I think percentages are a good starting point, but as you start progressing a little bit more through training, if you're supposed to hit an 80% of your squat, but you got home late because you were traveling from work, and then you had an argument with your missus or your fella, that's not a good mindset to maybe hit that 80%. So it's like, right, let's actually drop that down. And when you look at, I think using RPE and percentages is a good balance, but it's not a bad thing if you don't hit that percentage that day, because you've got to take all those external factors into play, and it might be that, and why I'll send it weekly is because after 3 weeks, this block of training that they're doing, they're absolutely fried. So it's like, let's have a little bit of a deload, because I think diving straight back in and thinking that you're going to be able to do the things that you did before lockdown might cause more harm and injury than good. So build it up slow and steady. Like I say, it might be just starting off at 2 sets of everything and then just building up there. And then, like with anything, it's like a little bit of a snowball effect. The more you start building momentum, then you can start looking at, I'm going to add this in. It might even be that you might start off with only 3 sessions. So it might be squat Monday, bench Wednesday, deadlift Friday. I usually train 4 days a week, so I'll have 2 squat sessions, 2 deadlift sessions, and then I'll bench in every session, or a variation of bench, because that's my weakest lift. So a lot of people will have been hitting a lot of push-ups during lockdown, so it might be that you don't dive straight in at doing a bench press in every session. You might actually change the variation. I don't know, do an overhead press, which is still, like that analogy, plan B is close to plan A. Still a pressing movement, just gives your chest a little bit of a rest, so you're not increasing that volume a little bit more. So I hope that kind of answered your question.
Yeah. No, it definitely did. I think, again, I know we have like other things to talk about, but whatever. We'll just dive into things as we dive into them. So just with your training, and just to kind of, again, I want to try to give people context, because people are probably thinking, oh, that's interesting. Like, you're deadlifting twice, squatting twice, benching 3 times. So I guess for you at the moment, are you trying to hit a certain amount of volume per lift? Or, like, for example, you trying to hit 10 sets per movement? Or are you trying to hit 15? Or are you trying to hit 8? Or are you just trying to hit more so the intensity? Like, how is it working with you?
For my own training? Yeah. So how my training will work for my own programming is I'll do a main squat. It'll either vary. I'll either do if I had a barbell, I'll either do a main squat no variation, and either a squat variation, or depending on what my first squat session was, it'll be either a lighter or a heavier squat session. So the second session will either be a variation or lighter and heavier, if that makes sense. Same for my deadlift. I might have a deadlift, one deadlift session, no variation, and then my second deadlift session might be block pulls or deficit deadlifts or anything like that. And then bench press, it'll be a heavy session, a lighter session, and then a variation. Because of the equipment that I've got, so when I went down to the gym to pick up some of my own equipment, because I realised I'd lent out equipment to quite a lot of members, but hadn't picked anything up for myself. I picked a 20 kilo kettlebell, 12 kilo kettlebell, and I sort of panicked. It was sort of like, a panic buy. I took the strongman log and put that in the back of my car. So I can't increase the weight on any of those. So I'm just working on volume. So I might do with the 20. I did try a Zercher squat with a log. Anyone who has a log at home, don't try it. It's very, very awkward to do. However, overhead pressing and Z presses and that sort of stuff is quite good. So I'm just going to increase the amount of sets that I'm going to do. So I started off originally maybe doing 3 sets and then going up to 4 sets. And then I sort of got bored of doing that. So it's like, right, I'm going to set a 30-minute timer, 10 reps of squat, push-up, deadlift, and glute bridges, and try and get some more rounds in there. So I'm trying to condense a lot more work within that area, within that time. So there's a few things that you can play around with, but like I say, unless you've got so the clients that I've got the garage gyms, I've played around with just their sets. Or if they start fatiguing a little bit, I've maybe added in an AMRAP set, so they can work a little bit more volume on there if they've only got a limited amount of weight, which is a little bit easier to track and manage their training because I can tell by the load. Whereas some people with just using one the same weighted kettlebell, I think that's quite hard. to manage. So giving people right as many rounds as you can in 20 minutes, 4 sets of whatever, mainly to keep their interest up, but also because it's quite hard to manage. So I'm still doing the movements, but maybe not as regimented or as close to the guidelines that I'm probably used to working towards.
Okay, cool. Just a cool insight, I guess, into your own training, and just to probably summarize the strength section that we just talked about, because we did talk about a whole bunch in there, which was good though. It was good. I guess, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here or add in anything. So if you're at home, you don't have the weight, you don't have the equipment, and you're finding it tough to overload or at least kind of like probably have a relatively similar stimulus that you would have in the gym. And by that, we just mean like you're lifting around the same weight or more. It's probably good to just focus on variations of lifts, single arm, single leg, right? And then, if you're in the rep ranges of, I don't know, anywhere between 3 to 6, maybe 3 to 8, you're probably still going to get stronger. And the other thing too is bigger muscles are stronger muscles too, right? Like if you're getting bigger, you're going to get stronger too. But try to do those things first. You can then obviously use bands, you can have weights, you can use your backpacks. And then if you do end up going back to the gym, try not to just dive straight into it. And like Steve has said, you want to take your time because you're not going to be used to those movements. So although you might be getting stronger in your single arm and single leg work, when you get back to your bench press and your deadlift and your squat, you got to remember like the load is a massive difference. And it's kind of, when you said that, you got to start easy. Like I'm the complete opposite. If I try to do something, it's like you said, ego and pride, right? Like I hadn't run a 5K, I'm not even kidding, in a good 10 years. Yeah, like I play sports, I do everything. I consider myself a jack of all trades, master of none type of thing. And I just thought, you know what? I got nominated for this 5K run. I'm going to go run it. Hadn't run in 10 years. I was in bits, man. 2 weeks. Like my body was good, but my calves were literally like they were shot. And then I thought, okay, I'm just going to go do it again. I did it again the next week. And again, same thing, calves were shot. And slowly now my body's like, okay, you can do it now. But it took me a while where I should have just done maybe a 1 or 2K chilled out, 1 or 2K chilled out and built my way up. Right. Is that fair to say? What I just kind of summarized that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's like what I mentioned before, it's just a challenge and just thinking outside the box a little bit. And if you're struggling, or if you're working with a coach, ask somebody, and they'll point you in the right direction. It's funny that you say there about ego and pride. One of the biggest things I missed or is missing is the real heavy lifts. And if you're a lot of people will be missing that because everyone loves smashing PBs and all that sort of stuff. And if you're looking for that stimulus, I know we've spoken about volume and changing the variations. One of the best things that you can do, get a towel, stand on it, either in a deadlift or a squat position, and just pull. It's not going to move anywhere, so it's an isometric contraction for maybe 3-5 seconds. 5 seconds is probably maybe a little bit too long, but I think it's an overcoming isometric that creates the same stimulus as lifting heavy, because you're putting your body under a massive amount of tension, a massive amount of strain for those 3 seconds, which is probably how much a lift would last. And you only need to do maybe 3 of those, and it's as though you've done a heavy lift. Now, I'm not saying do that every single workout, but if you are wanting that stimulus of a heavy lift, a bench press will probably be pushing up against something or pushing against a wall, but it's quite hard to replicate. But especially for squat and deadlift, which are my favourite lifts, just using something like a towel can replicate that a little bit more.
Good little trick, good little tip and trick. I like that.
Yeah, there you go. I don't have many, but there's a little nugget of information for you.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. We spent quite a bit of time on that one. I think it's good because I think over the other podcasts, we had a lot of people talk about muscle building and not necessarily as much as strength. So I think it's nice to cover that. Now, and I know I mentioned like for your rep range at home, like 3 to 6. The only reason I didn't say don't do 1 or 2 is just because I'm not saying don't do it, but I just think some people maybe never did a pistol squat before. And the last thing I want you to do is do a pistol squat when you can't even do one. And the next thing you know, you blow out your knee, right? It's like start off nice and easy, get used to the movement. And then if you want to do sets of twos, do sets of twos if you feel comfortable doing it. But it's kind of like we just said, you're not going to go into the gym and do your 1 rep max right away. You need to test, find out where you're at. In terms of muscle building, and we'll just touch on this quickly because I think the principles kind of apply. Everything we just talked about is going to pretty much be around the same thing with muscle building. What are some, I guess, like what are the general guidelines you have with some of your guys? Because I'm assuming with your blocks of strength training, you know, there's still elements of hypertrophy in there, which is muscle building. So what do you kind of have in there? Like, what's the rep ranges? What are the sets and the type of stuff you're using there?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the bigger muscles you've got, obviously, the more potential that you have for strength, and it can be. We mentioned a little bit about spending this time to maybe drop a little bit of weight, so that and I've touched on a couple of times. You want to be as efficient as you can. If you have got a lot of fat on your body, you know, we want to try and drop that down a little bit more so we can tap into your strength a little bit and your recovery a little bit. I know, you know, for myself, you know, I'm trying to drop a little bit of fat as well. In terms of the muscle building type of things, the main thing that I've mentioned is it's not impossible to build muscle whilst you're during lockdown. But the main thing you've got to it's probably right now a good way to maintain muscle rather than build, and that is maintaining the amount of protein that you're eating, and then thinking about the three things that you kind of need for muscle building. So that's mechanical tension, metabolic stress, and muscle damage, and we can all kind of work on those a little bit more. So mechanical tension would be putting yourself under load, but like what we mentioned, that doesn't always have to be barbells or bands or something like that. You can still do body weight. The only thing with that is that you have to make those exercises a little bit more challenging. So I put a post out the other day, I think it might have been yesterday, about push-ups. So you can still develop you know, your upper body hypertrophy, if you like, by following push-ups, but maybe not just doing standard push-ups. So there's loads and loads of variations out there. You can put a rucksack on your back. You can put your dog on your back. You can do feet elevated push-ups or anything like that. And then you can have a look at, right, what's the next thing that I need for muscle building? Right, metabolic stress. So all that is the higher volume. So, you know, you're getting a little bit of a pump. So if you've got a band, put the band around your shoulders and underneath your feet. Right, let's hammer some of those. You can do bicep curls with those. So there's loads of variations that you can do with that. And then obviously muscle damage. So if you're doing enough, that's going to be, you know, with soreness. So we're not talking about, right, I've done a 30-minute HIIT class, or like what you mentioned, Dan, right, going for a run. That's all good, and that's focusing on your aerobic pace. But you know, think about, right, am I feeling this exercise where I'm supposed to be feeling it? Because if you go, I can't remember who mentioned it, but when it comes to muscle building or bodybuilding, some bodybuilders might not do a back squat because they don't feel it in the muscle that they're working. The best exercise to tap into their quads, if you like, and work that squatting movement, but also tapping into the muscle, might be a front squat or a goblet squat or whatever it may be. So when it comes to muscle building, think of those three factors: maintain your protein, make sure that you're getting enough recovery in, but yeah, make sure that you're progressing with those exercises, and then everything else that I've spoken about. You know, when you're going back into the gym and all that sort of stuff, that still applies. You know, with the strength training side of things, but with muscle building, I think there's more scope to try and make potentially a little bit more progress or maintain a lot more during lockdown for muscle building.
Yeah, definitely. And I've read a few studies in the past talking about how, you know, even just doing a few sets to failure for the main muscle groups, like, and again, by few sets, I mean literally like 1 or 2 sets a week, you could probably maintain your muscle mass. And again, it's just make sure the intensity is there. And then if you're not going to be training to failure, well, again, just doing maybe 3-4 sets a couple times a week per muscle group, you're probably going to maintain as long as the intensity is there. And you could actually probably make some progress if, again, what we talked about earlier in the strength section was you're doing single arm, single leg, variations. You're just finding what's going to work for you. And to your point, where you feel the muscle working. Because how many times have you worked with a client where you make them do a row and they're like, I don't feel it there. And then you have to find 5 variations still. You finally go, do you feel it in your lat? They're like, oh yeah, I feel it right here. And you're like, yeah, that's your lat. There you go. And it takes time to figure that out sometimes on your own, but just keep picking away. And if you just kind of listen to, obviously not just us, but I think most of the guys that we listen to in the world, you know, like the Eric Helms and all the guys that we talked about earlier, if you just follow those basic principles, you'll be fine, right? It's just the guidelines, and then you have to tweak it accordingly to yourself because everyone's different.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it's funny that you mentioned about or a keyword that you mentioned there, intensity, throwing in some, I like to call them just challenge sets, right? As many push-ups as you can in 30 seconds. Another thing is, so Renaissance periodization, so Mike Israetel, or Dr. Mike Israetel, has been putting quite a lot of stuff out, doing like rest pause sets. So you can do rest pause. You've probably done it with rows or bench press, right? Do as many reps as you can, right? 10-second pause, and then go again, or drop the reps down, which puts a lot of volume and a lot of intensity through your chest or whatever exercise you're doing it. You can still use that. You can still use that now. It's just that the amount of reps that you're going to be doing for squatting is probably going to be a little bit more than what you would do if you were loading up in a goblet squat or whatever you're using before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, spot on. I think that's pretty straightforward because, again, I think a lot of what we talked about in the strength section kind of applies to the muscle building section. Obviously, the rep range is going to be different, but just know that it comes down to volume usually when you're trying to build, and the intensity for the most part. Those are the two big ones you want to hit. And whether you're doing that in a lower rep range, it's going to take you more volume. And if you're doing it within that kind of golden 6 to 12, 15 rep range, then again, it's going to be more time efficient. I think a lot of people through isolation, hopefully, have learned that, you know, you can get bigger in kind of all the rep ranges as long as the intensity and the volume's appropriate for that rep range. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people used to say, oh, you can't get bigger doing 20 reps. Well, you can. Like, you know what I mean? And then we haven't even dove into, like, not even on this podcast, just in general, like blood flow restriction training, which started to come out like big time. So yeah, a lot of other stones to turn and talk about in the future. So look, mate, I think we've covered quite a bit. So I don't want to miss out on this last bit because I think you've interviewed so many good people on your own podcast with the Strength Chat. So make sure you go check that out. Steve has gotten literally some of the best kind of experts in the game, competitors, you name it. Like I'm not even trying to big him up. He just really has. So we'll finish, I think, on this one before we do a bit of a quick fire round. But what are your biggest takeaways from all the people you've interviewed over the last, I don't even know, how long's your podcast been going on for?
I think I've been doing it for about 2 years. Okay. I think, it's only sort of picked up since the guests coming on. I think the first couple of episodes were just me chatting, which no one wanted to listen to. But yeah, speaking to a couple of others. There's been some coaches that I've followed for quite a long time and get quite a lot of limelight, but there's also coaches that I just know or have worked with or have been recommended from other coaches and that I know who maybe don't get as much limelight. And one of the biggest things that I've sort of found is that there seems to be a similar theme of what people are saying within their specialist area. It's just that the reach or the audience that they're saying it to differs in scale. So Eric Helms, for example, I know we've mentioned him a couple of times, but a really very well-respected coach, researcher within the world of health and fitness and strength training. Travels, does seminars, all that sort of stuff. But the same principles that he talks about and the things that we learn as coaches and deliver to our clients is much the same as, just a local coach in Leeds who has learned all that, but doesn't necessarily have the voice or the reach to reach a wider audience. So that's why, you know, I quite like having that balance a little bit, to see that, you know, there are coaches out there. It's not just because one of the biggest things is that sometimes the coach who shouts the loudest and has the biggest following, he must know or she must know what they're on about. That's not always the case. And I think just filtering that out a little bit more and giving people content from a variety of coaches, well known and not so well known, allows them to make their own decision of, right, well, what am I taking from this episode, and then what am I looking for? And then the other thing is on the flip side of that, some of the so I did a podcast with Professor Stuart McGill, probably one of the I still listen back to it sometimes. Probably one of the most informative podcasts I've ever done, and probably one of the most smartest blokes that I've ever met. The amount of knowledge that he has in his area of expertise is absolutely crazy, and he's gone down to that real fine detail. Obviously, he doesn't do that all the time with his clients. He'll just, like what we said, you know, keeping it simple when you're working with the clients. But the depth that he's gone into to help his clients is crazy. So for me, you know, the other lesson that I've learned, which has probably helped me a lot more as a coach, is if I don't know something, go out and find why this is, and taking a little bit of pride in what I do, to be like, right, you know, everything matters. Let's try and break everything down so that the service that you're giving to your clients, is the best that you can.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, mate, because a few things you mentioned there, a lot of times the people that have the biggest platform are obviously going to be the ones that are the most heard, but that doesn't mean that your local coach, local PT in your local gym doesn't know the same thing. I think it's very easy, obviously, for us to kind of put these people on pedestals, and rightfully so, because they're killing it. They're unreal. Like, don't get me wrong, a lot of the guys that you just mentioned have worked with thousands and thousands and thousands of people. So they've probably seen every single situation in every single context possible, so that when they do work with, you know, let's say me or you, and we hit a plateau or we hit a roadblock, they know why, right? And that comes with experience. But I think, again, what you mentioned too at the end was it makes us appreciate how they know the detail. Because I know for me, like lockdown, we were talking about it before the podcast, but just having read a lot more and you know, on things that maybe before I was like, oh, I kind of know that, but now it's like, no, I get it now. And now if a client asks me a question, I know exactly what the answer is, and I know exactly how to program it, exactly how it needs to adapt. So yeah, those are really, really good takeaways. Anyone your favorite in particular?
Ooh, that is a question right now. I really enjoyed speaking to Professor Stuart McGill. Just from a learning point of view, I kind of forgot that I was doing a podcast. I felt that I should just be doing notes, and then he, the guy that runs his courses, Joel Proskowitz. He's a really nice guy, and some of the analogies that he used, how he puts across his point, is very good. And I know we've done a couple of tangents on this chat, but I sometimes have a tendency to waffle a little bit more. But after speaking to him, trying my best to get to the point of what I'm actually trying to say. And then one of the probably or two of the funniest ones that have been really good has been Dan John, because his dog came into the room when he was chatting. I think he called it Sirius, and then we were talking about rugby because he's got an Irish heritage, which was pretty cool. And then the other one was, I know I mentioned Renaissance periodization. Dr. Mike Israetel. Any man that can put a dildo in an analogy of training is great. And it was one of those things where I didn't really know how to make it. But actually, when you listen to it back, his point was that, you know, every toolbox has a tool in it, you know, and a hammer can be useful. Whereas if you've got a dildo in a in a toolbox, yeah, it serves a purpose, but it might not be the right tool that you need.
Nice one. Nice.
Yeah, it still makes me laugh now. I think it's one of the best analogies that I've ever come across. So yeah, but you know, everyone that I've spoken to, I've tried to take a little bit from and enjoyed them. But just from our conversation, our chat today, yeah, there was a couple that when I sort of look back at who I've spoken to, there were some standout ones for me.
Nice, man. That's cool. Well, like I said, anybody who hasn't checked it out, go check out the Strength Chat. Like I said, some of these people you might not know, and some of these guys I probably don't even know either. So I'm definitely going to check some of them out, mate. That's good. We usually do every podcast, we do a kind of like flavor of the week segment, where I'll bring up like an article or we'll talk about something in a bit more depth. But to be honest, mate, we just covered so much. I think we're gonna skip it this week. We dove pretty in depth into the strength without going into too much detail, I think, which was good. But what we always do is we always finish off with a bit of a quick fire round. And you obviously don't know these questions, so I'm just gonna ask you a bunch of random stuff, and you kind of tell me as quick as you can what you think the answer is. So first of all, creatine, yes or no?
Yes.
Cool. You take it yourself?
I do.
Nice.
Haven't during lockdown, but when I've been training, and I recommend it to some of my clients as well.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just started loading it recently. Actually, for some reason, I never had it, and I thought, you know what, I need to start taking it. I don't know why. So
I realised that I was surprised that I actually answered that so quickly. I thought usually it takes me a little bit of time to think about it, so I impressed myself then.
There you go. Favorite lift out of the compound lifts?
Deadlift.
Cool. Any reason why?
This is where I'm going to sound really geeky. So deadlift for me is the purest form of strength, because if you can't pick it up off the floor, obviously you're not strong enough to lift that, and it's something very primal and animalistic about it. You know, being able to pick something up and put it down. That's why. That's my purism as someone who's interested in strength.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I think you'll have some people questioning it, but that's a good answer. What's going to be your first place you're going out for a meal once this is over?
So it's actually either between. I've already planned it out. You know, I do like a nice meal out. It's either going to be Black House,
nice,
on the grill, or probably Fazenda. Which will be up there.
Yeah. So anybody who doesn't know that, Black House is a steak and grill place in Leeds. That's class. It's really good. And then Fazenda is like is it Brazilian? Is it?
It's like a Brazilian barbecue, but
it's like unlimited meat, and it's just ridiculous. Yeah. It's so nice. Actually, you know what? I had a guy on last week. He used to work at my gym. He's now one of the head chefs at Fazenda.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, if ever you want his contact details, mate, you might be able to hook you up. You never know.
Oh, 100%. I'll be after that. I always remember that when the Europe's Strongest Man was in Leeds, they all went to Fazenda, just booked out a room, and I think they had to get extra meat in. You know, the amount of food that those guys will eat. But Fazenda's definitely up there.
Oh, that's pretty cool. That's cool. Yeah. Go to holiday destination. Or I guess where are you going next when this is done?
Funnily enough, I've actually been invited to a wedding in New Zealand. I had a couple of holidays planned this year. Last year, I saved all my holiday and went to America for a month and just under a month or a month. So this year I was going to spread it out a little bit more and have a few weeks. So I literally just Googled cheap flights. So there was a flight up to Stockholm. There was a flight to Italy, but then obviously Italy became the epicenter of The Walking Dead. So next year, hopefully, the plan is New Zealand, and that'll probably be the biggest chunk of time that'll be away, because having lived in Australia I never got a chance to get over to New Zealand. So I'd quite like to travel around there a little bit. So that's my next holiday destination.
Nice. Jealous, man. I want to make my way there as well. And then just last one, any good book recommendations?
Any good book recommendations? I got recommended, there's some on there. I ordered, there's a couple of sort of like fiction books that I've been reading, which are series. So quite like Bernard Cornwell and Simon Scarrow books. But the two books that I quite enjoyed was what does that say? Ant Middleton, First Man In. That's the first book that he brought out. So he's from SAS Who Dares Win. That was pretty good. And then the other one was Legacy. I think that's by James Kerr. Yeah, James Kerr. And that's an insight into how New Zealand, the All Blacks, won the World Cup, and how the things that were put in place to make them the team that they are, which was pretty good. As a rugby fan, and I quite like sports psychology, that was pretty good. And Ant Middleton, when he says in his book, the first line is, "I can't tell you about anything that happened on SAS missions." The more you delve into the book, he basically gives everything away. But it is a good read, and you just think that you see him on the telly, but actually, when you read into it, it's quite an interesting story, really.
Cool. Nice, man. That's good. Because my missus was I think it was my missus or my my housemate. They're like, you should get people's book recommendations. She's like, we want to know. I was like, all right. I'll get a book in there. Well, listen, man, that was a good hour or so of really, really good info. So massively appreciate you coming on. As always, I'm Dan Q, guy behind the Fitness Burrito Podcast. You can check me out at Abante Performance. But I'm going to let Stephen have the last word here. So Stephen, where can people find you on social media? What do you have going on in your life? All that kind of stuff.
Just wanted to say thanks a lot for thinking of me and asking me to be a guest on your podcast. Really appreciate it. For anyone that's interested, I know Dan's mentioned it. Anyone's that interested in listening to my podcast, you can find it on Instagram. I'll post all the links on there. So that's just @strength_chat. Type it in on Google as well. It'll come up with guests on there. If you've got any questions about what I've chatted about, or you want to drop me a message, Instagram is probably where I'm most active on. So @coach_Cuthbert. You can drop me a message on there. Everything that I share on Instagram is on Facebook as well. So that's just Coach Cuthbert Training Systems. I do have a website where a couple of my blogs are on there. I'm not probably as active or haven't been as active on my website as probably I should be, but I've got a few things in the pipeline in terms of blogs and articles. Hopefully I can share them in the next couple of weeks, and that's just www.coachcuthbert.co.uk. And yeah, if you've got any questions, I'm quite happy to help. So yeah, just give me a shout, and I'll see if I can help you out.
Couple things going on there, Stephen. Couple things. So yeah, no, massive thank you again, pal. And for everybody out there listening, thank you. Hopefully you enjoyed it. As always, we'll have everything in the show notes, all Stephen's details and stuff. So thanks again, Stephen.